everyone. A very good evening. You're watching The Money Show on ET now as part of our Rise with India primetime segment with me, Mubina Kapasi. And it's an action-packed day of interesting topics for you. And of course, I'm going to once again touch upon the tax provisions of Budget 2020 on popular demand. A lot of our viewers have been asking us their queries and questions. So we're going to address that in just a short while from now. Preeti Khurana of ClearTax will be joining us. And also on the show, in our Meet Your Fund Manager segment, today we'll be talking about the Quantum Long-Term Equity Fund. Nilesh Shetty, who's a fund manager, will be with us to help you guys take a decision on whether you should invest in the fund. And of course, in our Spend with TMS segment, all the interesting launches from Auto Expo 2020, 3 days down. What's it looking like and what more can we watch out for? We will be touching base with Kranti Sambhav for all the lowdown. So stay tuned. But back to the Money Show, where we are discussing what's going to change for your wallet. For one thing, it's going to be FM Sitharaman's Budget 2020. Taxes, of course, is something that's been on everybody's mind. And I'm sure a lot of you guys still have quite a few unanswered questions when it comes to Budget 2020. Well, fret not. I have with me Preeti Khurana, Chief Editor of ClearTax, to talk about of course, the tax regime that FM Sitharaman has introduced, the new changes, as well as, of course, to get all your questions and queries answered. So, Preeti, thank you so much for joining in on the Money Show. There's no direct cut, unfortunately, to the income tax bill as such for individuals. There's no increase in the exemption limit as well. But there is a bounty of some sorts given, especially if, you're from the middle income section of the society or lower income. If you're the kind of person who does not invest in PPF, which, may I add, is not exactly the best habit, of course. And unfortunately, FM Sitharaman seems to be, sort of okay with that. But Preeti, just to sort of, it's been 5 days for the budget, right? So just sort of a reminder for all our viewers of some of these budget provisions. I'll start off first with the new slabs. I think what everybody wants to know is that, yes, we know that, there'll be no PPF exemption allowed, no HRA exemption, no LTA exemption, etc. Basically, some of your most common expenses will not be allowed as a deduction. What would be allowed then, Preeti, now that we've had time to sort of peruse through, the fine lines in Budget 2020, what exactly will be allowed?
Right. So what will actually be allowed in the new regime will be your minimum exemption limit of 2.5 lakhs. But unfortunately, the increased minimum exemption limit of 3 lakhs for those who are 60 to 80 years of old is not there. Similarly, 5 lakh exemption limit for super senior citizens, those who are more than 80 years old, is also not going over. So what stays is your minimum exemption limit and also deduction for your own NPS contribution. So the employees NPS contribution, which was eligible under section 80 CCD, is also getting carried forward. So you can claim that. Other than that, there are certain specific exemptions, such as if you're claiming VRS and special case scenarios, and some of those are allowed. Also, if you have a rental property, your property has been let out and you are paying interest on home loan on such a property, then you may be able to claim deduction for the interest. But beyond that deduction, there is no set off available from other heads of income. So rented property, claim your interest, knock off from the rental income, but beyond that, there is no set off from the remaining heads of income and no carry forward. So that's broadly, what's getting into the new regime from the old regime.
So Preeti, the bit that you mentioned on interest on house property, let's say if I don't have any rental income, can I still claim that deduction, as negative, or like you're mentioning, I cannot set it off against any heads of income? Because basically, if I don't have any rental income, that means I cannot claim any deduction on the interest that I'm paying. Is that right?
You're absolutely right. So what is going to happen is that if you choose the new regime and you want to claim your interest, you cannot claim any interest benefit on a property which is self-occupied or vacant. So that's there. So no interest deduction for self-occupied or vacant properties. only for rented properties you will be able to claim interest deduction. And when I say rented property, it's obviously assumed that you have certain rental income. Take off standard deduction, take off property taxes, and whatever remains is the maximum interest deduction you can claim in that financial year.
Okay, so that's essentially what this new regime entails. I think it's an important point for all our senior citizens as well to note, those who are 60 and above, that don't think that your exemption limit will be at 3 lakhs in the new regime. That's gone. And even for those who are 80 and above, it's not 5 lakhs, it will be brought down to 2.5 lakh rupees. That as well is a very important clarification that everybody should take note of. Preeti, the other point where there was a lot of confusion was with respect to the residential status. You know, there was, of course, several clarifications that were put forward, you know, by the FM that, look, you know what, if you're an NRI and you have, you know, global income, that's not going to be taxed in India. But then you had seafarers saying that, listen, what about us? We are, you know, for a certain amount of time in sea. I think there was a clarification for that as well. What about those guys working on offshore fields? They as well are a bit confused with respect to their residential status. So just explain to our viewers currently what is it currently rather, and what will change once the new fiscal, that's when the budget provisions will essentially kick in.
Right. So if you look at the existing provisions which were there applicable until financial year 1920, those said that you need to satisfy certain conditions to become resident. Now, of course, if you don't satisfy, you become non-resident, but you could be resident but not ordinarily resident and non-resident altogether. So we'll come to that later. But firstly, you need to, if you satisfy the condition that you have spent more than 182 days in India, then you would become resident for that year. Or else, if you've spent 365 days in the previous 4 years and 60 days in the current year. So you had to, you know, sort of satisfy one of these two conditions, either 182 days in India or 365 days out of the last 4 years, including 60 days in the current year. Now that 60 days limit was, you know, sort of raised to 182 days for people, you know, who were visiting India, or those who were, you know, members of a crew of an Indian ship. For them, that limit was increased. So, you know, they could be in India for up to 182 days, but still not meet that criteria. So that limit was enhanced. Now what they've said is that that limit is only 120 days. So I'll explain it better with an example. Say if you are a seafarer, you are a member of a crew on an Indian ship, and you spend a few days in India and few days at the sea and a few days in some other country, then in India, if you spend more than 120 days, then you are likely to lose your non-resident status. So that's what you need to make sure of. Also, if you are visiting India for certain purpose, then the maximum that you will stay here should not exceed 120 days. So that's broadly, they've actually restricted your eligibility to become a non-resident. So, you know, people who are coming to India or those who are seafarers, they need to make sure that, you know, they don't cross that threshold. If they do, then their entire global income is likely to be taxed in India.
Okay, all right. Well, folks, you know what? We will continue getting in those clarifications from Preeti, but just after this very, very short break. And of course, post that, we will be answering your questions and queries as well. The numbers appearing on the top of your screens. Note down your query. We will get them answered with Preeti Khurana after this very short break.